The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of the Beverly Hills mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. 17-year-old Isabella rolled her wheelchair to her favorite spot by the pool, where she could see the city sprawling below. 3 years ago, she would have been getting ready for dance practice right now. 3 years ago, everything was different. Her father, David Chen, was already in his home office making calls to Tokyo. As the CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies, he never really stopped working. But Isabella knew the truth behind his busy schedule. He worked so hard because it was easier than facing what happened to his daughter. It was easier than admitting that all his money couldn't fix everything. The accident replayed in Isabella's mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. She had been coming home from her dance studio when a drunk driver ran a red light. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. Lucky. Isabella didn't feel very lucky as she watched her physical therapist, Mrs. Rodriguez, walking up the pathway to their house. "Good morning." "Isabella," Mrs. Rodriguez said with her usual bright smile. "Ready for today's session?" Isabella nodded, though she wasn't really ready. She had been doing physical therapy for 2.5 years now. Stretching, exercises, electrical stimulation, pool therapy. Her father had hired the best therapists money could buy. They came from famous hospitals and had worked with Olympic athletes. But her legs remained as still as stone. The therapy room in their house looked like something from a medical center. It had every piece of equipment imaginable. Parallel bars, exercise bikes, standing frames, and machines Isabella couldn't even name. Her father had spent over $2 million on everything, hoping something would work. "Let's start with the usual stretches," Mrs. Rodriguez said, helping Isabella onto the therapy table. As Mrs. Rodriguez moved her legs through the motions, Isabella stared at the ceiling. She had memorized every crack in the paint up there. She knew exactly how many light bulbs were in the fancy chandelier. She had counted them 1,000 times during these sessions. "Your muscle tone is staying good," Mrs. Rodriguez said, trying to sound positive. "That's important for when feeling comes back." Isabella wanted to scream. When feeling comes back. Everyone always said when, never if. But Isabella had stopped believing in when a long time ago. She had felt nothing below her waist for 3 years. No pain, no tingling, nothing. It was like her legs belonged to someone else. After therapy, Isabella's mother, Catherine, knocked on her bedroom door. Catherine had been a successful lawyer before the accident, but now she spent all her time taking care of Isabella. She had given up her career, her friends, everything. The guilt of that made Isabella feel even worse. "How was therapy today?" Catherine asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The same," Isabella replied, not looking up from her book. Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Williams called. He wants to try a new treatment. There's a clinic in Switzerland that's doing experimental work with stem cells." Isabella closed her book harder than she meant to. "Mom, please. No more doctors. No more treatments. But this could be different. The research shows." "The research always shows something," Isabella interrupted. "Remember the clinic in Germany? The one in Japan? The surgery in Boston? They all showed promise too." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Isabella hated making her mother cry, but she was so tired of hope. Hope hurt more than anything else. Every time they tried something new, there was this tiny voice in her head that whispered, "Maybe this time." And every time, that voice got a little quieter when nothing happened. David appeared in the doorway, still wearing his expensive suit from another video conference. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Isabella said quickly. She didn't want to have this conversation again, but Catherine told him about Dr. Williams' call and the Swiss clinic. David's face lit up the way it always did when he heard about a new possibility. In his world, every problem had a solution. You just had to find the right one and pay enough money. "I'll call them today," he said. "Money is no object." "Whatever they need." "Dad, stop," Isabella said. "Please just stop." David looked confused. In business, when something didn't work, you tried something else. You didn't give up. You found another way. But Isabella wasn't a business problem to solve. That evening, Isabella sat in her wheelchair on the mansion's huge balcony. The house was so big that she sometimes felt lost in it. 30 rooms, 8 bathrooms, 5 fireplaces. It was beautiful, but it felt like a very expensive prison. The elevator that had been installed for her wheelchair was hidden behind fancy panels. The ramps were made of marble so they would blend in. Everything was designed to make her disability invisible, but that just made her feel more alone. She thought about her friends from school. They visited at first, but that stopped after a few months. They were busy with their lives, going to parties, learning to drive, applying for colleges. Isabella was stuck in this house, going from her bedroom to the therapy room to the living room and back again. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former dance teacher. "Thinking of you, sweetheart. The team misses you." There was a photo attached of the dance studio where Isabella had spent every day after school for 10 years. Where she had dreamed of becoming a professional dancer someday. Isabella turned off her phone and looked out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives. They were walking to restaurants, climbing stairs, dancing at clubs. Simple things that Isabella used to do without thinking about them. Now they seemed like miracles. The sound of her parents arguing drifted up from downstairs. They tried to keep their voices down, but Isabella could hear them. They were fighting about money again, not because they didn't have enough, but because David kept spending millions on treatments that didn't work. Catherine thought they should focus on accepting their new reality. David thought giving up was the same as failing. Isabella understood both sides. Her mother wanted to protect her from more disappointment. Her father couldn't accept that his daughter might never walk again. They were both trying to love her in their own ways, but it was tearing their family apart. The truth was, Isabella had accepted her situation months ago. She was never going to dance again. She was never going to walk down a beach or hike in the mountains. She was never going to have a normal life. The sooner everyone else accepted that, the sooner they could all move on. But deep down, in a place she tried to keep locked away, there was still a tiny spark of hope. She hated that spark because it made everything harder. It made her wonder what if when she should be focused on what is. It made her dream about impossible things when she woke up in the middle of the night. As Isabella rolled her wheelchair back inside, she passed the family photos lining the hallway. There she was at 5 years old, spinning in a pink tutu. At 10, winning her first dance competition. At 14, performing on stage with the biggest smile on her face. That girl seemed like a stranger now. Isabella went to her bedroom and got ready for another night of staring at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow would be any different from today. In 3 years, it never had been. But somehow she still found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow might surprise her. David had been driving for 3 hours when the engine started making strange noises. He was supposed to be at a business retreat in the mountains of Oregon, but his mind was still back home with Isabella. The quarterly board meeting had gone well, but he couldn't focus on profit margins when his daughter barely spoke to him anymore. The expensive car finally gave up completely on a quiet country road surrounded by farmland. David pulled over and called for roadside assistance, but the operator said it would be at least 2 hours before anyone could reach him. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and he didn't have any other meetings until tomorrow. He got out of the car and looked around. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, covered with crops he couldn't identify. The silence was strange after living in the city for so long. No traffic, no sirens, no construction noise. Just wind moving through the fields and birds singing somewhere in the distance. That's when he noticed the man working in the field across the road. Even though it was almost 90 degrees, the elderly man was bent over, pulling weeds by hand. He looked like he had been working since sunrise, but he moved with steady determination. David checked his phone again. No signal. He was stuck here whether he liked it or not. The old man must have noticed him because he straightened up and waved. Then he started walking toward the road, moving slowly but steadily. David could see he was probably in his 70s, with dark skin weathered by years of sun, and hands that looked like they had never been soft. "Car trouble?" the man asked in accented English when he reached the fence. "Yeah, it just died," David replied. "I called for help, but they said it'll be a while." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Hot day to be standing on the road. I'm Roberto, by the way. That's my farm." He pointed to the small house visible in the distance. "David," he replied, shaking the man's rough hand. "Nice to meet you. You want to wait in the shade? I got cold water and a place to sit," Roberto offered. David hesitated. He didn't know this stranger, and the farmhouse looked nothing like the places he usually visited. But the sun was beating down, and he was already starting to sweat through his expensive shirt. "That's very kind of you," David said. Roberto led him through a gate and along a dirt path toward the house. The farm was small, maybe 20 acres with vegetables growing in neat rows. Everything looked well cared for, but it was clearly the work of someone without much money. The tools were old but clean, and the fence posts had been repaired many times. The farmhouse was simple but welcoming. Roberto brought David a glass of ice water and gestured to a chair on the small porch. The shade felt amazing after standing in the sun. "You from the city?" Roberto asked, settling into another chair. "Los Angeles," David replied. "I run a tech company." Roberto nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I've been here 40 years. Came from the Philippines when I was young. My wife, she passed 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," David said, and he meant it. She was a good woman. "We worked this farm together since we got married. Now it's just me, but I keep going. She would want me to keep going." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. David found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't for months. There was something peaceful about this place, something he couldn't quite name. "You got family?" Roberto asked. David pulled out his phone and showed Roberto a picture of Isabella and Catherine. "My wife and daughter." Roberto studied the photo carefully. "Beautiful family. Your daughter, she looks like dancer." David's chest tightened. "She was. She had an accident 3 years ago. She can't walk anymore." Roberto handed the phone back gently. "That's a hard thing. For her, for you. We've tried everything," David found himself saying. "Every doctor, every treatment. I've spent millions of dollars, but nothing works. She's getting more depressed every day, and I don't know how to help her." He couldn't believe he was telling a complete stranger about his family's private pain, but something about Roberto made him feel safe to talk. Roberto was quiet for a long moment, looking out at his fields. "In my village back home, my grandmother was healer. People came to her when doctors couldn't help. She had gift in her hands." "What kind of gift?" David asked. "Hard to explain in English," Roberto said slowly. "She could feel things with her fingers. Could make people better just by touching them. Not magic, just knowing how body's supposed to work." David had heard about traditional healers before, but he had never paid much attention. His world was all about science and technology, about things that could be measured and proven. "My grandmother teach me some things before she die," Roberto continued. "Not everything, but some. I help people here sometimes when they get hurt working. Just simple things." "You mean like massage therapy?" David asked. Roberto shrugged. "Maybe, but different. In Philippines we call it hilot. Very old way of healing. My grandmothers say the body remember how to be well, but sometimes it forget. You just have to remind it." David wasn't sure what to think. It sounded like the kind of thing Catherine would call nonsense. But Roberto didn't seem like someone who would lie or try to take advantage of desperate people. "Your daughter," Roberto said after another pause. "Doctors say she never walk again?" "They say it's very unlikely. The damage to her spine was severe." Roberto nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes doctors right. Sometimes they not know everything." A truck appeared on the road, and David realized his rescue had arrived. He stood up reluctantly. He had been here less than an hour, but he felt like he had learned something important, even if he couldn't say what it was. "Thank you for the water and the shade," David said, "and for listening." Roberto walked him back to the road. As the tow truck driver prepared to hook up David's car, Roberto reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving. It was a simple figure, maybe 3 inches tall, worn smooth by handling. "This was my grandmother's," Roberto said, pressing it into David's hand. "She always say it bring hope to people who need it." David looked at the little carving. It felt warm in his palm, and he could see the care that had gone into making it decades ago. "I can't take this," he said. "It must be precious to you." "My grandmother, she give things to people who need them," Roberto replied. "I think she want you to have it." The tow truck driver was ready to go. David climbed into the passenger seat, still holding the wooden figure. As they drove away, Roberto called out, "If you ever want to try a different way of helping your daughter, you know where to find me." David watched the old man in the side mirror until they turned a corner and the farm disappeared. He looked down at the wooden carving in his hand. Such a simple thing, but it felt heavy with possibility. For the first time in 3 years, David found himself wondering if there might be another path forward. A path that had nothing to do with expensive machines or famous doctors. A path that led back to a small farm where an old man still believed in the power of hope and healing hands. David kept the wooden carving on his desk for 2 weeks, picking it up whenever he needed to think. The smooth wood felt warm under his fingers, and each time he held it, He remembered Roberto's gentle voice saying, "Sometimes doctors not know everything." But life in Los Angeles pulled him back into its familiar rhythm. Board meetings, conference calls, investor presentations. The business world demanded his attention, and it was easier to focus on problems he could actually solve. Stock prices and market share made sense. His daughter's condition still felt like an impossible puzzle. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Dr. Harrison from the Swiss clinic called on a Thursday morning. David had been excited about this consultation for weeks. The clinic was famous for breakthrough treatments, and their stem cell research had shown amazing results with spinal injuries. "I've reviewed all of Isabella's medical records," Dr. Harrison said in his precise accent. "I'm afraid our treatment protocol wouldn't be suitable for her case." David felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Your website said you've helped patients with similar injuries." "The damage to your daughter's spinal cord is too extensive," the doctor explained. "Our therapy works best when there's partial sensation remaining. In Isabella's case, the nerve pathways appear to be completely severed." David set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "So there's nothing you can do?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, I wish I had better news." After hanging up, David sat in his office for a long time, staring out at the city skyline. This had been their last real hope. The most advanced clinic in the world had just told him what he refused to accept. Modern medicine had reached its limits with Isabella's case. That evening, Isabella was quieter than usual at dinner. She pushed her food around her plate without eating much, and when Catherine asked about her day, she just shrugged. "Did something happen in therapy?" Catherine asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez is leaving," Isabella said without looking up. "She got a job at a rehabilitation hospital. Today was her last day." David and Catherine exchanged glances. Mrs. Rodriguez had been working with Isabella for over a year. She was the best physical therapist they had found, and Isabella actually liked her. "We'll find someone else," David said. "Someone even better." Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, it doesn't matter who you hire. Nothing's going to change. Mrs. Rodriguez told me the truth today. She said she's never seen anyone with my type of injury recover, not once in 20 years. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Catherine reached for Isabella's hand, but Isabella pulled away. "I appreciate everything you've done," Isabella continued. "All the doctors, all the treatments, all the money you've spent. But I'm tired of pretending this is going to get better. I'm tired of false hope." That night, David couldn't sleep. He walked around the house, ending up in Isabella's therapy room. All the expensive equipment sat silent in the darkness. Machines that were supposed to fix his daughter, but had only reminded her every day of what she had lost. He thought about Dr. Harrison's words. Complete nerve damage, no hope. The finality of it felt like a wall he couldn't climb over or break through. David went to his study and opened his laptop. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't looking at business reports or medical research. Instead, he found himself searching for information about traditional Filipino healing. Most of what he found seemed unscientific, full of terms he didn't understand and explanations that made no sense to his logical mind. But he kept reading. Stories of people helped by healers when doctors had given up. Testimonials about the power of touch and belief. It all sounded impossible. But then again, so did most of the medical advances he took for granted. Roberto's words came back to him. "Body remember how to be well, but sometimes it forget. You just have to remind it." The next morning, Isabella didn't come down for breakfast. Catherine found her still in bed, staring at the ceiling. "I don't want to do therapy today," Isabella said. "Or tomorrow. I don't want to do it anymore." Catherine sat on the edge of the bed. "Sweetheart, we need to keep your muscles strong." "Why?" Isabella asked. "What's the point?" "I'm never going to use them anyway." When Catherine told David about the conversation, he made a decision that surprised himself. He asked his assistant to cancel his meetings for the day and found Isabella in her room reading. "Want to take a drive?" he asked. Isabella looked suspicious. "To another doctor?" "No doctors," David promised. "Just a drive. Maybe get some lunch somewhere." They drove north out of the city, neither of them talking much. David wasn't sure where he was going until he found himself on the highway toward Oregon. Isabella didn't ask questions. She seemed content to watch the landscape change from city to suburbs to farmland. After 3 hours, Isabella finally spoke. "Where are we going, Dad?" David gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. There's someone I want you to meet. A doctor? No, a farmer. Isabella turned to look at him. A farmer? What does a farmer have to do with anything? David told her about his car breaking down and meeting Roberto. He told her about the wooden carving and Roberto's grandmother who had been a healer. He told her about the conversation that had been playing in his mind for weeks. Dad, this sounds crazy, Isabella said when he finished. I know it does, but what if it's not? What if there's something we haven't tried? Isabella was quiet for several miles. You really think some old farmer can help me when all those fancy doctors couldn't? I don't know, David admitted. But I met him and there was something about him. Something that made me believe he might know things other people don't. They stopped for gas in a small town and Isabella called her mother to tell her where they were. Catherine wasn't happy about the sudden trip, but she could hear something different in David's voice. Hope maybe, but a quieter kind than usual. As they got closer to Roberto's farm, David felt nervous. What if the old man wasn't home? What if he thought David was crazy for bringing his daughter all this way? What if this whole trip was just another disappointment waiting to happen? But when they turned onto the dirt road leading to Roberto's house, David saw him working in his garden just like the first time they met. Roberto looked up as the car approached and waved as if he had been expecting them. David parked the car and got out, then went around to help Isabella with her wheelchair. She looked small and uncertain in the late afternoon sunlight, and David suddenly worried that he had made a terrible mistake. Roberto walked over slowly, wiping his hands on an old towel. He looked at Isabella with kind eyes and smiled. You must be the dancer, he said gently. Isabella blinked in surprise. How did you know that? Your father showed me your picture. I could see it in your eyes. Roberto looked at David, then back at Isabella. You came long way. You want to hear what old farmer thinks he can do? Isabella glanced at her father, then nodded. Yes, she said quietly. I want to hear. Roberto's farmhouse smelled like herbs and old wood. Everything was simple but clean, so different from the sterile medical facilities Isabella was used to. The walls were covered with family photos and handmade decorations that looked like they came from the Philippines. In the corner sat an old wooden chair that had been worn smooth by decades of use. My grandmother's chair, Roberto said when he noticed Isabella looking at it. She did most of her healing work sitting right there. Isabella wheeled closer to examine it. There was something peaceful about the chair, something that made her feel calm in a way she hadn't felt in years. Tell me about your legs, Roberto said, pulling up another chair to sit across from her. Not what doctors told you. Tell me what you feel. Isabella was surprised by the question. Every doctor she had seen wanted to know about her medical history, her test results, her symptoms. No one had ever asked what she felt. I don't feel anything, she said. It's like they're not even part of me anymore. Roberto nodded thoughtfully. When did you stop feeling like dancer? The question caught Isabella off guard. What do you mean? In your heart. When did you stop being dancer inside? Isabella thought about it. I guess. Right after the accident. When the doctors told me I'd never walk again. Ah, Roberto said. So your body forgot how to be dancer same time your heart did. David sat quietly in the corner, watching this strange conversation. It wasn't like any medical consultation he had ever witnessed. Roberto wasn't taking notes or asking about medications. He was talking to Isabella like she was a whole person, not just a collection of damaged nerves. In my village, Roberto continued, we believe body and spirit connected. When spirit gets hurt, body forgets how to heal. When spirit remembers, sometimes body remembers too. Isabella felt tears starting to form. But what if it's too late? What if I've forgotten how to be myself? Roberto smiled gently. Dancer never really goes away. Just hiding, waiting for right time to come back. He asked if he could examine her legs. Isabella hesitated, then nodded. She had been poked and prodded by so many doctors that one more examination didn't seem to matter. But Roberto's touch was different. His hands were rough from farm work, but they moved with surprising gentleness. He didn't use any instruments or machines. He just placed his hands on her legs and closed his eyes like he was listening to something only he could hear. Interesting, he murmured after several minutes. What? Isabella asked. Your muscles, they not as dead as doctors think. I feel small spark, very weak, but still there. Isabella's heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had been disappointed too many times before. Are you sure? Body tell me many things, Roberto said. Sometimes I'm wrong, but usually I can feel what's hiding underneath. He explained that in traditional Filipino healing, they believed the body had memory. Even when nerves were damaged, sometimes the memory of movement remained in the muscles and bones. Like phantom feeling, he said. You know what that is? Isabella nodded. She had heard about people who lost arms or legs but still felt them sometimes. This may be different kind of phantom. Maybe your legs remember dancing, even if brain can't talk to them right now. Roberto suggested they try some sessions together. Not like physical therapy, but traditional healing methods his grandmother had taught him. He warned them it might not work, and if it did work, it would take time. How much time? David asked. Roberto shrugged. Body heals on its own schedule. Maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe never. But if we're going to try, we need to try with patience. Isabella looked at her father. She could see the hope building in his eyes, and it scared her. But she was also curious about this gentle old man who talked about her body like it was still alive, still capable of surprise. What would the sessions be like? She asked. Roberto explained that he would use massage techniques passed down through his family, combined with movements designed to wake up sleeping connections between mind and body. He would also teach her meditation methods his grandmother had used. Not magic, he emphasized, just very old knowledge about how body works. They decided Isabella would stay at a small bed and breakfast in the nearby town for 2 weeks. David would return to Los Angeles to handle business but would visit on weekends. It felt strange to leave Isabella with someone they barely knew, but something about Roberto made them both feel safe. The first session took place the next morning in Roberto's garden. Isabella was nervous as he helped transfer her from the wheelchair to a comfortable mat under an old apple tree. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. First, we just breathe, Roberto said, sitting beside her. In Philippines, we believe healing starts with learning how to be still. Isabella had tried meditation before, but this felt different. Roberto's voice was soothing as he guided her through breathing exercises. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what her legs couldn't do. She was just existing in the moment. After 20 minutes of breathing, Roberto began working on her legs. His touch was firm but never painful. He massaged muscles that Isabella couldn't feel, moving her legs through gentle motions while humming softly under his breath. What are you humming? Isabella asked. Old song my grandmother taught me. She say music helps body remember how to move. As the days passed, Isabella found herself looking forward to the sessions. Roberto never promised miracles or gave her false hope. He just worked patiently, talking about his farm, his late wife, and the village where he grew up. Sometimes he told stories about people his grandmother had helped. Was she really able to heal people? Isabella asked during their 5th session. She helped many people, Roberto said. But she always say she not the one doing healing. She just remind body what it already knows. On the 7th day, something changed. Isabella was lying under the apple tree as Roberto worked on her left leg when she felt something strange. Not movement exactly, but a tiny sensation, like electricity running through her muscles. Roberto, she whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might make it disappear. I feel it too, he said calmly, his hands still working. Very small, but something waking up. Isabella started crying. After 3 years of feeling nothing, this tiny spark of sensation felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. Don't get too excited yet, Roberto warned gently. This just beginning. Like small plants starting to grow, we need to be patient and careful. But Isabella couldn't help being excited. For the first time since her accident, her body had surprised her in a good way. As Roberto continued his work, she found herself remembering what it felt like to dance, to move with grace and purpose, maybe, just maybe. The dancer inside her was starting to wake up. The sensation in Isabella's left leg grew stronger over the next few days. It wasn't movement yet, just a warm tingling that came and went like waves. Some mornings she woke up feeling nothing at all and panic would fill her chest. But Roberto remained calm during these setbacks. Healing not straight line, he would say, continuing his gentle work. Sometimes body needs to rest before it can remember more. By the 10th day, Isabella could feel Roberto's hands on both legs. The sensation was faint, like touching something through thick gloves, but it was real. She had stopped telling herself it was imagination. Something was definitely happening. David arrived for his second weekend visit and immediately noticed the change in his daughter's face. She looked more alive than she had in months. There was light in her eyes that he hadn't seen since before the accident. "The feeling is getting stronger, Dad," Isabella told him excitedly. "Yesterday I could feel Roberto massaging my ankle. I actually felt it." David looked at Roberto with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief.
"How is this possible?"
"The doctor said the nerve damage was permanent." Roberto shrugged in his modest way. "Maybe doctors see only what machines can measure. But body has many ways of healing that science not understand yet." That evening, Isabella called her mother from the bed and breakfast. Catherine had been worried sick, unsure whether to be hopeful or terrified that this was just another disappointment waiting to happen. "I know it sounds crazy, Mom, but something is really happening," Isabella said. "I can feel things I haven't felt in 3 years." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Sweetheart, I want to believe this, but I'm scared for you. What if it's just temporary? What if the feeling goes away?" "Then at least I'll know my body is still capable of surprising me," Isabella replied. "For 3 years I felt like I was already dead from the waist down. Now I feel alive again, even if it's just a little bit." On the 12th day, Roberto tried something different. Instead of just massage, he asked Isabella to close her eyes and imagine she was dancing. As she pictured herself moving to music, he gently moved her legs through dance positions she remembered from years of training. "Feel the movement in your mind," he said softly. "Let your brain remember what dancing feels like." Isabella concentrated hard, visualizing herself performing a routine she had loved. As Roberto moved her legs, she tried to connect her mental image with the physical sensations she was starting to feel. Suddenly, something clicked. For just a moment, it felt like her brain was talking to her legs again. The connection was weak and lasted only seconds, but it was there. "Did you feel that?" Roberto asked, and Isabella knew he had sensed it too. "Yes," she whispered. "It felt like my legs wanted to move with the music." Roberto smiled. "Your grandmother's spirit, she getting stronger." By the 13th day, Isabella could feel pressure and temperature changes in her legs. When Roberto placed ice on her skin, she could tell it was cold. When he pressed firmly on her muscles, she could feel the pressure. These were sensations she had thought were gone forever. "I want to try something," Isabella said during their session. "I want to try to move my toe," Roberto nodded. "Try, but don't force. Just ask your toe very gently." Isabella closed her eyes and focused all her attention on her right big toe. She imagined it moving, pictured it flexing downward. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, so slightly that she almost missed it, she felt something. "Roberto, look at my toe," she said urgently. Roberto was already looking. "I see it. Very small movement, but I see it." Isabella stared at her toe in amazement. She tried again, concentrating with everything she had. This time the movement was clear. Her toe was actually moving. She started crying, but these were tears of joy. After 3 years of paralysis, she had just voluntarily moved part of her body. "We need to call my parents," she said through her tears. When David and Catherine arrived the next day, Isabella showed them her toe movement. Catherine collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by emotion. David stood with his mouth open, unable to believe what he was seeing. "The doctors need to know about this," David said. "We should get Isabella to a hospital for tests." But Roberto shook his head. "Not yet. This healing very delicate right now. Like baby bird learning to fly, too much poking and testing might disturb the process." Isabella agreed. She didn't want to leave Roberto's care until she was stronger. The medical world could wait a little longer. Over the final days, Isabella's progress accelerated. She regained movement in several toes, then her ankle. The sensation spread up her legs like warmth returning to frozen limbs. It wasn't complete recovery, but it was miraculous progress that no doctor had thought possible. On their last day, Roberto took Isabella to his garden one final time. She could now feel the warm breeze on her legs and the texture of the grass beneath the mat where she lay. "How do I thank you for giving me my life back?" Isabella asked. Roberto was quiet for a moment, looking out at his crops. "You don't thank me, you live. You dance again if you can. You help other people who feel hopeless. That's how you thank the gift you've been given." Before they left for Los Angeles, Roberto gave Isabella a small wooden carving, similar to the one he had given her father. This one was shaped like a dancer, arms raised gracefully above her head. "To remind you," he said simply. The drive home was different from their trip north. Isabella spent most of it moving her toes and ankles, marveling at each small motion. David couldn't stop smiling. And even Catherine, usually the practical one, was talking about the future with excitement. Back in Los Angeles, Isabella began working with a new physical therapist who specialized in spinal cord recovery. But now she had sensation to work with, movement to build upon. What had seemed impossible 3 weeks earlier was now just very difficult. 6 months later, Isabella took her first steps with the help of a walker. A year later, she was walking short distances on her own. She would never dance professionally like she had dreamed, but she could move, she could feel, she could live a full life. The Chen family established a foundation to study traditional healing methods alongside modern medicine. Roberto became their first research partner, though he insisted he was just a simple farmer who had learned a few things from his grandmother. Isabella often returned to visit Roberto on his farm. Sometimes she brought other families who had lost hope, families whose children had been told they would never walk again. Roberto would listen to their stories, examine their children with his gentle hands, and sometimes say those 3 simple words that had changed Isabella's life. Let me try. Not every story had a happy ending. Traditional healing, like modern medicine, had its limits. But sometimes, when science had given up, an old farmer's wisdom could awaken something that everyone thought was lost forever. Isabella kept the wooden dancer on her desk as she studied to become a doctor herself. She wanted to bridge the gap between the world of high-tech medicine and the ancient knowledge that lived in places like Roberto's farm. She wanted to make sure that other families wouldn't have to choose between science and hope, because sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from machines or medicines, but from the simple belief that the human body remembers how to be whole.